All right. Well, thank you all again for being here today. Thank you for our panelists for being here today. My name is David Walton. I am the event and program manager for the Tompkins County Chamber of Commerce. And we are very pleased to bring you the next webinar in our COVID-19 Business Readiness series. Today, we will be focusing on constructing strong messages on social and email platforms. We are very fortunate today to have Ms. Amy Newman. Amy is a senior lecturer and director of grant challenges at the Dyson Cornell SC Johnson School of Business. We have Ms. Paula Tarallo. Paula is the president and CEO of East Shore Marketing. And Chirag, how do you say your last name?
Saluja.
All right, awesome. Chirag Saluja. And Chirag is the digital analytics manager at East Shore Marketing. Today, these fine people will be walking us through a couple of key points that are going to focus on balancing information sharing and empathy, using an appropriate tone and organizational strategy, choosing the best medium for your messages, and tracking engagement via social and email channels. Just to give everyone a little heads up, we love for our attendees in the webinars to post any questions that they may have in the chat box. Feel free to type that out, and then one of us will either pull your question and answer it in the middle of the presentation today, or we will save it for the end of the Q&A. There are no bad questions, because I assure you something that you want to know is probably something that someone else wants to know as well. Again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for our presenters today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Ms. Amy Newman.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave, and thanks everyone for joining us. We decided to do this webinar to focus a little bit more specifically on messaging strategies. So I'm glad to talk with you. I'm the director of the Grand Challenges program at Dyson. We do partnerships with community members for our students to do projects. And I also teach management communication at Cornell. Paula and Chirag, maybe you could introduce yourselves for a minute.
Sure. I own East Shore Marketing. We are a marketing and digital media firm here in Ithaca. We work with regional businesses in the Finger Lakes. We work with them on marketing strategy. We do paid media campaigns all over the Northeast and Southeast, and work with them on digital media campaigns. Go ahead, Chirag.
Oh, sorry. My name is Chirag, and I am a digital analytics manager at East Shore Marketing. My primary responsibilities are creating and optimizing campaigns. I also do content marketing and a little bit of website design as well.
Perfect. Thank you. As David mentioned, if you want to post questions in chat, we'll do our best to monitor those. Feel free to post whenever they're on your mind, and we'll interrupt. We should have time at the end for questions as well. So I'm focused on these first 2 points briefly: planning and organizing messages, and also with a particular eye on communicating bad news. And hopefully you won't need to, but at this time, if there is bad news to communicate, such as a closing or layoffs, I'll have some advice around that. And then we'll spend more of the folks from East Shore Marketing on the last 2 topics. So I show this video as a joke on YouTube if you want to watch it. You know, you see the title here, every COVID-19 commercial is exactly the same. And they look at a bunch of companies, and you have to start with the somber music, and then we have the hopeful statement. Yeah, you could watch this on your own, but my only point here is that we really need to be customizing messages to different audiences. And I find, especially in times of change and when there's bad news to communicate, we're not comfortable with it. So we might send one message to a whole group of people when actually people have very different needs, or what kinds of information they need and how they might react emotionally. So when I teach this in my crisis communication class, and I also did a couple of webinars or courses developed for eCornell, we talk about communication planning. So I present this as a template if you'd like to use it. There's a link at the bottom of the slide with a longer report that describes how to use this template. And, and it might even be too complicated for some of you who have small businesses, but I do think it's useful to just think through different audiences who you need to communicate with. What do they need? How might they react to a message? The communication objectives tell you, what do you really want them to do differently, or think differently, or feel differently as a result of your message? Think about the form. We tend to default to email sometimes for communications internally. Maybe that's right, maybe not. For bad news, the research tells us that people actually prefer to hear bad news in person. So where possible, that's what I would suggest. Who's the right person to deliver the message? And then how are these going to be sequenced? And that last point is important, particularly with bad news. We've seen many organizations that, that employees find out the business is closing or that they're getting laid off from public sources. And we really want to try to avoid that. So that's my note on the left side, to start with internal audiences and then move on to external audiences. In terms of the messages themselves, and I'm thinking mostly about email here. East Shore marketing folks are going to talk more about social media applications. We definitely want to see news up front, the main points up front. And people have this idea that, oh, it's bad news, I should communicate indirectly. First talk about all the positive things and then give the bad news more at the end. It's a softer approach. And you've probably heard about this, the sandwich approach. Start with some good news, give the bad news, and then end with some good news, especially for things like performance discussions. That's where a lot of that research comes from. But there's actually very little research support that makes a difference in how the message is received. People prefer to hear bad news right away. If you want to include a really short buffer at the top, and a buffer might be just one statement, that might be okay, but I wouldn't wait too long to get to the main point. I think this is such a great example. It's just from a week ago from Brian Chesky at Airbnb. And I realize it's a big company example, and this is a very long email. I have the link here to their news if you wanted to look at the whole email. But what I really wanted to point out here was he's starting with this little buffer, about being in his home. But he pretty quickly says, this is sad news. And then in the second paragraph up front, he's admitting that they'll have to do layoffs. Otherwise, I find employees are frustrated and might feel manipulated by a message that doesn't get to the point quickly enough, especially when oftentimes they know that bad news is coming anyway. I would also suggest that messages are skimmable. Maybe this is more a Cornell thing. I get some really long emails with very dense paragraphs, and they're extremely difficult to read. I also find that I miss main points because they might be hidden in the middles of paragraphs, for example. So I'm starting with a summary paragraph and recognize that for business audiences especially, that might be all they read. They might just read that first paragraph. Keep it as short as possible, look for wordiness, some extraneous words, and then use text enhancements to highlight main points. Here's an example from State Farm. I like this a lot. Again, there is a short sentence up front. I know everybody's dealing with challenges right now, but the points that I want to know as a State Farm customer are in bullets and bold text. It's extremely easy for me to see what they're offering. Just a very easy strategy to make sure that people can skim what they need and aren't bogged down too much with the writing. And my final report suggestion is to be yourself, and that's how we build trust. I would strongly recommend Brene Brown's video, if you haven't seen that, on YouTube, on vulnerability and authenticity. Is the idea of just being who you are. Let employees, let your customers see that you're upset, that you're hurting, that you're trying to do everything that you can. I don't think there's any magic to what are the right words or what's the right tone to use. When you're yourself and you speak from your heart, make the best connections, and hopefully people will gravitate towards your business. That's all for me there. I've got a question. No, it's just a thank you from David. Okay, so now I'm gonna pass along to Paula.
Great, thanks Amy, I appreciate it. I think you set up the framework extremely well for messaging. So when we talk with clients and work with internal marcom teams about media, we tend to use this marketing framework. And we found that it works really well because our focus is always on a holistic approach. Whether we're executing something for the client that we're working for, or whether they have a well-developed internal marcom team who we're working in conjunction with, we want to make sure that everything works together. And we found that this framework works really well. So we have the three marketing pillars, if you will: owned media, which is a channel that a brand controls, such as your website or social media accounts, and then listed the role here and their benefits. I won't read them because they're obviously here on the chart. But then paid media, which is a brand, which is a channel that the brand pays to leverage. And so, you know, typical things that we're all familiar with: commercials, paid search, display ads, all of that. And then earned media, which is typically referred to more commonly as PR. And that's when your customers become the channel. And so it's PR, it's social sharing, it's all of those wonderful ways that other people carry your message and brand forward. And when the three of these work together, that's when you really have, you're firing on all cylinders. That's really the goal, is to have all three of these pieces work together. Next slide, please. But for the purposes of today, we're actually going to focus on owned media because that's where we can really control a lot of our messaging. And that includes, you know, organic search and social brand platforms are major parts of our owned media channels. And that's where we can structure our messaging and control the messaging that goes out from our brand. Includes, you know, again, our mobile friendly website, of course. I can't stress that enough, that your site should be mobile friendly by now, branded social media channels and pages, email marketing, and then of course any branded content that you're able to push out. Again, the messaging that we're talking about for today is really focused on our own channels and reaching the right audience in that. And so I found a couple of graphs here that talk a little bit about each audience. You know, in 1964, Marshall McLuhan said, "The medium is the message." Well, I'll bet in 1964, he had no idea our media environment was going to become this fragmented. And so it becomes even more important that the medium is the message now. And it's important for businesses to do a little research. You know, as a business owner, you know your audience the best, you know your customer the best. So that should dovetail into a little bit of research in terms of where they're spending their time online and where you want to invest your efforts. So you can see here, this is just a little bit of information. The slide, as you're looking at it on the right, is about the type of user, Facebook users in the United States by age and gender. You can see that it might skew a little younger than you are thinking. This is very current information from very valued sources. I know people tend to think that Facebook users are very old now, and that's not entirely true. But Facebook usage, and I don't just mention Facebook. Here, there's Facebook, Instagram, some top 5, Snapchat, YouTube, and Twitter, about how often they're on the platform. That's also useful to know too. But you can find this information by just doing some quick research online to find out where customer is, and then also to experiment a bit. I think now is a great time to do some testing. There are more people online than ever, and it's a great time to perhaps test and experiment a little with platforms that you haven't used before, to see what kind of engagement you might get from them. If you're used to using Facebook or Instagram, you might try Twitter. If you have a highly female audience customer, you might try Pinterest. It also will evolve depending on the types of content that you want to share. But the other piece of this is to make sure that you make efforts to grow your email list. I do not want to forget about mentioning email. It is highly valuable in terms of building your brand and building your brand advocates. These are people who have asked to hear from you in their inbox, which I always recommend to clients that you treat that with value. They've invited you into their life. And so you want to make sure, as Amy mentioned, about the type of messaging you're providing and the construct of that messaging. Next slide, please. And so we talk about crafting a compelling message. And so we talk a little bit about, David mentioned about some things, the chamber soon is going to kind of move into more of a reopening mindset and helping businesses as they look to reopening. And a lot of our clients are working through that and talking about what kind of messaging we want to focus on. And what we're hearing from all types of resources are acknowledging and adapting. So the messaging coming out of this pandemic or business shutdown, we want to acknowledge the state of the world we're in, but then show what your business is doing to adapt to it. So you don't want to ignore it by any means. I mean, this has been catastrophic for so many people and businesses. So you want to acknowledge it, but then show how you're making your business safe for people to come into and do business in. And the best platform that you choose for that messaging might be based on the type of content that you choose to share. I chose 3 local messages here that I thought were really well done and unique on their own, in their own way. Gola Astoria, I think, has been doing a great job on social media. They did a little example. This post here is just a little example about something they were able to do at the suggestion of a customer. And so they featured that on their social page. The Heights Cafe has been distributing their daily menu. This happens to be one of their emails. And it's well constructed. I can immediately go to this email and find out, what the service hours are, what the phone number is, what the menu. It doesn't include any extraneous information that I don't need right now. This is what this email is about. It's about the menu. And so I love the construct of that. And Michaeline's over here, it was an Instagram post. I thought she did something really, really inventive and creative and supported another local business. If you ordered flowers through her website, and so she was driving website traffic, for Mother's Day, you received a gift certificate from Miracle Nails for a pedicure. So wonderful way to support each other and promote each other. So I thought these were some great examples of some really strong messaging. When you're thinking about posting, change up your posts. Again, as I mentioned, this is a great time to experiment. If you usually use just images, try a little video. Facebook and Instagram Live in particular are really, really driving numbers in terms of viewership. And they can draw interest and draw a new audience into your business. I just noticed today in an article that Facebook and Google are offering banners now to support small businesses. Google's offering a banner that You can share on any ads that you're doing as a business that you're a pickup point for food or packaged goods, whatever. And then Facebook is offering badges for people to share about to support their favorite small businesses, which just adds fun and a more compelling message. Longer form content might be better delivered by email, as Amy mentioned, in a well-constructed way. Email subscribers are your strongest audience for reasons I mentioned previously. They're your brand advocates. Think about making your email shareable so that they, share to a friend, forward to a friend. But you could also treat them as a special audience, a VIP audience, and share any kinds of news with them first before you put it out on social. Next slide, please.
Actually, Paula, we had a question. I think it was related to the previous slide. Do you have suggestions on how to go about doing the research that you suggested?
Well, the Pew Research Center here, Pew Research Center is a great website that has very current free information. So I would highly suggest them as a great resource. Also, eMarketer is a great resource. They have a large amount of free information. They do have a paid subscribership, but there's some great info free. I would just, if you know who your audience is, or you think you know who your primary customer is, I would just Google that, social media sites that reach women 35-54, and then start going, from there. And you will find, I think, a lot of great information without getting too far down the rabbit hole, of some basic information like this, and then start your experimentation with your posting on those channels, and you'll find that it morphs. It may morph. You may find that your engagement is very strong, and then you're on the right track. And Chirag will tell you more about how to measure that.
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
So then the last piece I want to talk about is about fine-tuning your marketing strategy. We're always about working smarter, not harder. And so, this is a slide that talks about methods to use to communicate with customers according to small and medium-sized businesses in the United States. And you can see that the overwhelming majority of them use Facebook, followed by Instagram, and then email. So you have the top three very strong platforms, Twitter, and then you have a Facebook group. Again, though, this is just generalizations. So if your customer is a female, 35 plus, definitely look into Pinterest. The total audience numbers might not be as strong, but you're not looking for numbers. You're not looking for large amounts of people. You're looking for the right people. And so when you find that sweet spot, and Chirag will tell you a little bit more about how to measure that, you want to go for that conversion. You want to resist the urge to go for the total, likes or things like that. You want to look for the conversion and response to your engagement. So, we talk about our clients about defining your SMART goals. And so that simply means they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're time bound. So, don't set a goal and then, it's for the whole year. If you have a specific project, set the goal, measure it, move on. And then measure engagement, practice social listening just by cruising your comments and some of the metrics that you can find in Facebook Business Manager. Do some competitor research. What's your competition doing? Social media is a great resource for that. And then make sure to grow your brand advocates by email and getting social media to grow your email channels. Now I'll let Chirag talk to you a little bit more about how to measure what's successful for you.
Thank you, Paula, for a great recap on the messaging. So before we begin measuring anything, we should have specific KPIs for each social network. They should be measurable and they should be in line with business goals. So for example, measurable KPI could be increasing the page engagement rate by 30% by the end of this quarter. Or if you're doing a lead generation, it could be increase quality leads by 10% at the end of this month. Next slide, please. Some of the key-based metrics that we like to look at on a daily basis, and all of these can be found in each platform's respective dashboard, are engagement, see how our posts are performing, impressions, reach, how many impressions they're generating, what sort of reach is incoming, actions on pages, such as are they driving any clicks, are they driving profile visits, top posts, and best timings. This is one of our favorite ones to look at, especially if we're doing a lot of A to B testing. We usually like to see what our top posts are in terms of engagement, and then if we see a certain theme that's performing really well, we usually cater more of our content towards that theme. Followers data, what the audience interest might be, their language, demographics data, hashtags, the hashtags that we're using on Twitter or Instagram, are they helping bring us more impressions for our post, or are they being narrowed down as we're using more and more? And lastly, some of these email insights, and depending on which platform you use, could be MailChimp, could be Klaviyo, all of these should be in there. And the one that we like to look at are open rate, click-through rate, bounce rate, and unsubscribe rate. Next slide, please. After we look at our base metrics, we like to measure our results with Google Analytics, and this is by far the best free available tool that you can use on your website if you're not at the moment. To quickly identify the quantity of a traffic, seeing what sort of users are coming to your website, we access the source/medium report to see what sort of engagement and where people are going as they land to your website, or where they could be dropping off, or what specific page is resonating the most. We like to see the behavioral flow. Create custom goals. This is one of the most simplest and excellent way to measure how often users are completing a certain action. And for example, that could be, let's say, you want to track the number of PDF downloads. And lastly, anytime you post a link on your social media or your email, always make sure that the URL is tagged with a UTM parameter at the end, and this goes for the bit.ly links as well. Next slide. Some of these strategies to increase engagement. Encourage conversation. So ask questions and encourage people to share their thoughts on your page. So for example, if you can have a post with, let's say, 5 images of different dresses, and your question could be, which one of these dresses would you wear on a date night? Share content that is relevant to your audience. If you're just starting out, this will require quite a lot of A to B testing at the beginning, just to see what theme or what topics is resonating the most with your users. But essentially, the idea behind this bullet point is you want to find out who your audience is and what their interests are. Host contests and giveaways. This is one of the easiest way to increase engagement. And you can also ask people to take certain actions, like, for example, liking your Facebook post, or could be just sharing your content. And one tool that we have seen people use for giveaways is Rafflecopter. It helps you create giveaways and helps you set up everything, including where to put your privacy link and what rules and regulations can be. Use videos as much as possible. So from our personal experience and what Mark Zuckerberg came out recently with, Facebook has updated its algorithm where they give more preference to videos and they show more videos to more people. Therefore, it helps you with more engagement as well. If you do not have any videos, that's nothing to worry about as well. But if you can, try to post as much videos as you can. Host a weekly Twitter chat or Facebook Live. With Twitter chat, you can also do a giveaway, but you also want to have some sort of a hashtag that brings more people to the event. And for Facebook Live, one of our favorite strategies to increase engagement is running a small paid campaign with a daily budget of $5. Essentially, the whole idea behind this is once the Facebook Live is concluded, you want to immediately bring more people to it. So by doing a paid campaign, you're essentially increasing your reach by quite a lot and helping increase your page engagement as well. Run paid campaigns, by far the easiest and quickest and quite simplest way to increase any sort of engagements. Use emojis. They make your post lighthearted, they make it fun. And just a research I was reading just a couple of days ago, that any post that uses a smiley face can increase the engagement. If you use I may be pronouncing this incorrectly and I apologize, a grimacing face, it increases the engagement by 132%. And lastly, A/B test everything. And this is pretty much going back to what Paula mentioned as well. This is the best time to A/B test anything, whether it is your content, whether it could be the theme, could be the design of your videos or images, the landing page, anything. This is by far the best time to test anything. And next slide, please.
Great. Chirag, we had a question about the contest. Can you restate the contest tool, please?
Yeah, it's Rafflecopter, RAFFLECOPTER.
Great, thanks. And you mentioned also that something when you were talking about the emojis, maybe could you spell that too, because we weren't sure how to pronounce it.
Oh, yes. I'll just type it in the chat. I think this may be a little bit easier.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll move on to the next slide.
And lastly, one tip that I would like to leave all of you using Google Analytics, I would highly recommend adding Google Tag Manager as well. It's completely free and you are able to get far more deeper look at some of the analytical data. For example, let's say you have a landing page that has multiple links that are going outside and you want to track how many people are clicking on each of those links. Google Tag Manager can help you out with metrics. It can also track custom events like video views, especially if your video is not hosted on YouTube, but rather embedded on the landing page itself. And you can also track scroll behavior. So at what point or at what scroll, let's say they scroll, at what point or what scroll do user exit out of your website? And when you do set up Google Tag Manager, one of the most common mistake is people forget to link Google Analytics link Google Analytics with Google Tag Manager, and then they're not able to see any data on their end. Next slide, please.
That's it? Did we miss one?
No, I think we covered everything.
I think I'll stop sharing now, and we are open to additions. If you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that, or type into the chat box and I'll pick it up.
And Chirag, just to make sure, I see that Barry's asking a follow-up question just on the name again. The contest tool is called Rafflecopter?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. I'm gonna go hunt for it right now and put a link in the
Other questions or comments? Success stories you want to share? We like those.
I just want to throw out there to everyone that just this morning, about 30 minutes before we signed on to this webinar, I ran across a great infographic about how to think about your business messaging during this time. And it was a really wonderful tool, I think, to help walk you through the thought process about how you should think about the type of messaging that your business wants to share, should share, you know, whatever's going on in your head about, you know, what kinds of messaging my business should share. So if anybody would like me to email that to them, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to send it out.
Awesome.
Right. Oh, we have a question. Oh,
Yep.
Sorry, David.
I'll let you take it, Amy.
Oh, we're probably looking at the same one. Tips for B2B businesses.
Well, you know, I don't think, I mean, they obviously are different. And I think a lot of times B2B businesses are best served by direct communications with their clients. So, you know, using email to send out information. LinkedIn obviously is a very strong platform for B2B. So I would tend to focus on those two versus, you know, what I may think of as more consumer driven, Facebook, Instagram. You know, it depends where your engagement's coming from, but you know, I feel really strongly about email marketing, especially to your own clients. And does anybody else have any feedback?
Just to jump in and kind of expand a little bit more. So when you're doing email marketing and you're collecting a lot of email addresses, one thing that you can also do is create a custom audience in Facebook and upload those email addresses, and you can create a small paid campaign just targeting those users.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chirag. And, you know, we didn't talk a lot about paid. Chirag, you mentioned it. And I know, and I didn't focus on it because, you know, in times like this, it might be tough for people to find budgets. But as Chirag mentioned, you know, $5 a day, there's a lot of noise in social media. And I think people sometimes get disappointed because they can't get the results they're looking for. But if you would devote or could devote even $5 a day to amplifying your message through some paid social media, that would, I think you'd find a lot bigger and better response.
Thanks, Paula. We have a question from Elizabeth. I can take this one. During a crisis situation, how often should business leaders be reaching out to their audiences to provide updates? And is there such a thing as too much or too little information? It's a real balance, and it's a tough one. I would say as a general rule, we under communicate rather than over communicate, especially in crisis situations. As I said before, I think people try to avoid it altogether. And sometimes it's helpful just to know what the status is, even if there's nothing new to report. But as I say that, I think we do have to be careful, especially at this time with COVID. There's been almost too much at times, and it is unusual. So it's a difficult balance. I would say generally you're communicating when you have something to say, or you know that an audience is anxious to know what your decision is or what's next. I don't know, Paula or Chirag, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would agree with you, Amy. I mean, I have to admit, early on, when everybody was responding, when this all, you know, was hitting, I felt a little bit like all the messages I was getting from everyone, I mean everyone, in terms of the businesses that we dealt with, both personally and on the business side, I just assume you're on our side. Maybe that's a mistake. but I assume you're on our side. So, but so many of them really had nothing substantive to say other than to say, you know, we're in this with you and all of that. I get that. I think information of value, since we all have some busy inboxes these days, is the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I've been looking at crisis communications and change messaging for so many years. This is really the first time that I have felt it's too much. Usually it's too little.
Yeah, good point.
Any other questions? Would anyone like to chime in or share something? Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question to our experts. Without having to type, we'd love to hear your voice.
Hi, it's Barry. I just want to say this feels so reassuring and I'm very grateful. I work with bickering twins. The guys are my sons. They have no time or patience for social media. I do the best I can from afar. And I always actually look for students to help me, which is going to be a little tough right now. But, you know, I think it's so important. They tend to feel it's not. Well, I want to strengthen our email marketing too. And you made a good, you know, plug for why that is so important. And totally agree that there can be too much. In our case, I know it's been too little because it's been hard and they haven't known what the next steps are, that uncertainty. But like you said, even just, you know, I think touching base once in a while with your fans and saying hello. So we've tried to do that, but I just really feel grateful and I wanted to share that. So thanks.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
You know, Barry brings up a good point because now is not the time to go silent. You really do need, your brand needs to be out there. And again, it doesn't need to be every day, but it does need to be represented. And so that people, so you don't lose brand share during this whole, you know, these, when you're closed or when you're only able to do pickup and delivery. I mean, you definitely don't want to be silent now.
Very true.
All right, any other questions? We have about 10 more minutes for our scheduled time, but I do want to respect everyone's time, but also want to make sure that the space and the floor is fully open for any questions, thoughts, ideas. Does anyone want to share any best practices of things that they found on their own via their communication through social media or via your website?
I have some questions. Hi. Can you hear me? This is Robin. I'm with
Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Oh, hi, Robin.
I'm with the Community School of Music and Arts. So, I mean, in the last few months, you know, we're facing this complete limbo, as most organizations and businesses are. You know, this limbo between, you know, what our in-person products or services are and this new virtual world that we're sort of navigating temporarily. In the content that we use, should we be depicting like what is current or like the glorious days of when we were all gathering in our space and doing things together? Like, could you speak a little bit about, you know, should we be depicting, using imagery of, you know, how things were or how things are, which would be screenshots basically of virtual programs? Just some thoughts on that, because we're in such limbo. So, you know, right now we're offering programs virtually as we are currently preparing for some unknown future of reopening at some point. So how do we place ourselves in the midst of all of this limbo and uncertainty in terms of our content? Does that make sense? The question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's for Paula.
Well, it's funny, Robin, because I think that's not a unique situation that you find yourself in, as you know. but I did just read and participate in a webinar exactly about this. So it was about how you want to be very careful about showing images of how it used to be, because you don't want anybody to misconstrue that's what's happening now. Because you are respecting all the differences that are happening now in our world. So if you do use those images, you need to reference that was at a different time. And maybe you're looking forward to getting back to that. But I think it's a very strong message for you to focus on what you are doing now. I mean, how much you've adapted to this new world we find ourselves in, and what value you're bringing to that. You're carrying on. And I think that's a great message, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially visually, especially, imagery, it's like, I don't know, we'll try to, so capturing like what we're doing now, it's nothing really to look at visually. It's happening in Zoom programs. Does that, but your insights are very helpful.
I think you should definitely share that. And I'm not, like in our case, in the restaurant's case, we had some imagery of physical improvements we were making, so we could put those up and speak to the future. So maybe you can think about, something you can show that you're doing, or even maybe because it's always good to have the imagery. I'm just thinking, but definitely what you're working on and future plans and all, I think is really appreciated.
And I'll kind of chime in on a personal note to agree with Barry's sentiment. I think that a lot of people have this mindset of, we can't wait for things to get back to normal in the way that things were. And the reality is that everything that we're dealing with, nothing will really be normal and nothing will really be the same. So I think that getting ahead of the curve and showing your audience, how are you not only adapting to the situation, but how you will adapt moving forward. I know that for me, there's a lot of this social distance technology that's put in place that I would like to carry over into my business moving forward for meetings and for the sake of efficiency and people's time. I think that as a parent, one of the challenges of getting my children to different activities, and whether that be sports, music, additional classes for like foreign language, is just the struggle of getting them there. So now knowing that Zoom is such a viable option and that teachers are able to conduct and hold classrooms with distance learning, showing that this is something that can continue on, I think would benefit you and your organization a lot, Robin. And also on another personal note, showing the images of past. I know for me personally, I have friends that are like posting things on social media of like times where they were at the beach, or times where they were at a picnic, or times where they were at a social barbecue and kind of reminiscing. But as I'm scrolling through in that moment, not taking the time to read the caption or the context, there has been judgment from me where I've been like, what? Why are you at a barbecue right now with 20 people? And I'll show it to my wife, and she will take the time to read it and be like, babe, that was a year ago. And I'll be like, oh, okay, judgment gone. But you want to make sure that you aren't getting that same kind of like gut reaction from people during this time when we are supposed to be social distancing and wearing masks and all the things, where on a quick glance, someone doesn't look at your organization and form that negative opinion without the proper context of, this is me just having a moment thinking back on the good times. People may misconstrue that message if it's not properly delivered in a quick instance, that in the pace that we live in our society.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right. Any other last minute questions? That was a good one, Robin. Anyone else with any thoughts? Remember, no bad questions here. All right. Well, on that note, if we have no further questions, I would like to thank again our presenters today, Chirag, Paula, and Amy. You guys are always amazing. I want to thank all of our attendees for being here today. And I do want to give a plug. I do see that we have some business owners here. This Friday, on the 15th of May, oh my gosh, we will be hosting another webinar in our COVID-19 Business Readiness Series, Leadership in Complex Times, or Why is Everyone Looking to Me? This is a really great webinar to host. It's hosted by Amy Kohut and One Step Leadership. Please feel free to head to the Chamber's website and sign up for that webinar as well. Just another great tool for people that are kind of in that position of, and it kind of ties to the question that Elizabeth asked earlier of everyone's looking to me as a business leader in terms of even something as simple as communicating out to people. What does that frequency look like? So Amy will also be addressing some of those questions and other leadership related questions. So if you know someone that you think would have some great takeaways from that, please feel free to send them over this Friday from 12 to 1 for that webinar as well in our series. Anything else that our presenters would like to share before we close out today?
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you guys so much.
It's always a pleasure. All right, well, you guys enjoy your Wednesday. Look forward to seeing you at the next one, and everyone take care and be safe.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.